Sammy Davis Jr. was hailed as the man who could do it all. He could sing with velvet tones, dance with lightning speed, act with commanding presence, and charm any room he stepped into. In the golden age of Hollywood, he was branded the ultimate entertainer, a once-in-a-generation talent. Yet beneath the applause, the flashing cameras, and the glamour of the Rat Pack lay a brutal contradiction. No matter how bright his star shone, the color of his skin kept pulling him back into the shadows. Born into a family of vaudeville performers, Davis stepped onto the stage at the tender age of 3. By the time most children were still learning their ABCs, he was already dazzling audiences with rhythm and charisma. He went on to conquer Broadway, the Las Vegas Strip, and film screens across America. He even broke into the Rat Pack, becoming the only black man in a group of legends, led by Frank Sinatra and Dean Martin. But while Sinatra and Martin were offered the finest suites in glittering casinos, Davis was forced to leave the very hotels where he performed, barred because of Jim Crow prejudice. His career was a tapestry of triumph and humiliation interwoven together. To millions, he was a beacon of talent. To the industry, he was still other. This is the story of a man who became an icon of entertainment but never escaped the cruelty of racism in Hollywood. Sammy Davis Jr.'s story begins in Harlem, New York, in the early 1920s. He was born into a family where the stage was not just a dream, but a way of survival. His father, Sammy Davis Sr., and his mother, Elvira Sanchez, were both vaudeville dancers who lived life on the road. From the very beginning, young Sammy was immersed in the world of performance, absorbing rhythm and movement before he could even properly read or write. At the tender age of 3, he was already performing with his father and the legendary Will Maston in what became known as the Will Maston Trio. Unlike many children who grew up with classrooms and playgrounds, Sammy's classroom was the stage, and his playground was the backstage corridors of smoky clubs and theaters. By the time he was a teenager, he had mastered tap dance routines so complex and dazzling that audiences would rise to their feet in standing ovations. But his rise was not just built on talent, it was forged in discipline. Sammy practiced endlessly, sometimes until his feet bled, determined to prove that he could not just equal but surpass the entertainment standards set by his white contemporaries. By the 1940s, he was already recognized in the entertainment circuit as a prodigy. He toured with the USO during World War II, performing for American troops, and though he faced prejudice even in uniform, the exposure brought his name to a wider audience. It was his versatility that truly set him apart. Sammy was not just a dancer, not just a singer, not just a comedian, he was all of them at once. He could belt out a ballad with the soul of a crooner, then launch into a tap routine that stole the spotlight, and finish with a joke that had the audience in tears of laughter. By the early 1950s, Hollywood was forced to take notice. He was no longer just the child prodigy of vaudeville, he was on the cusp of becoming America's greatest all-around entertainer. As Sammy Davis Jr.'s star began to rise in the 1950s, he discovered that fame in America could never fully shield him from racism. Even as he filled theaters with thousands of cheering fans, the harsh reality of segregation trailed him like a shadow. In Las Vegas, where he would become one of the most sought-after entertainers, the hypocrisy was staggering. Davis could headline at glamorous casinos on the Strip, drawing crowds who paid top dollar to see him perform. Yet when the lights went down and the curtains closed, he was forced to leave through the back entrance and sleep in boarding houses designated for black workers. The very hotels that profited from his talent refused to give him a room simply because of the color of his skin. There were moments that cut even deeper. Davis recalled being asked to perform at venues where he was barred from using the swimming pool or dining in the restaurant. In some places, he was expected to entertain an all-white audience and then vanish, as if he were good enough to perform but not good enough to share the same space. He spoke later about the humiliations, admitting that no amount of applause could erase the sting of being treated as less than human. Even his personal life became a battlefield. When Davis began a romantic relationship with white actress Kim Novak in the late 1950s, the backlash was ferocious. Studio executives and powerful figures in Hollywood feared scandal, and threats poured in from both the press and organized crime figures who had ties to the film industry. The message was clear. His career could survive only if he remembered his place. Through these early struggles, Davis found himself torn between pride in his groundbreaking success and the pain of systemic rejection. He was living proof that talent could break barriers, yet each day he was reminded those barriers were still firmly in place. By the late 1950s, Sammy Davis Jr.'s life changed when he became part of the Rat Pack, the legendary group of entertainers led by Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, Joey Bishop, and Peter Lawford. For a black man to be accepted into this exclusive circle of Hollywood royalty was itself a radical statement. Davis was the only man of color in the group, and his presence both challenged and exposed the racial attitudes of the era. On stage, the Rat Pack projected effortless camaraderie. They joked, sang, drank, and mocked one another with a rhythm that felt unscripted, electric. Davis was the spark, often the butt of racial jokes, but also the one who delivered biting punchlines back with grace. Audiences laughed, yet beneath the surface those jokes reflected the realities he faced every day. Sinatra, however, stood apart as Davis's fiercest defender. Frank had long despised segregation, and his friendship with Davis was more than symbolic. He used his immense influence to demand that casinos in Las Vegas allow Davis to stay in the same hotels where he performed. There are countless stories of Sinatra refusing to play venues unless Davis was given equal treatment. In one famous incident, when a hotel tried to bar Davis from the main dining room, Sinatra threatened to pull the entire Rat Pack show. Faced with losing their most bankable stars, the hotel relented. Through moments like these, Davis gained access to spaces previously closed to him, not because the system had changed, but because Sinatra forced it to bend. Yet the friendship was complicated. While Sinatra's loyalty gave Davis a shield, it also underscored the cruel truth. His dignity was still conditional, dependent on the goodwill of a white ally. Davis himself later admitted that while he adored Sinatra like a brother, he never forgot that acceptance in Hollywood came at a price. He was still asked to laugh at racist jokes on stage, still reminded that his success did not make him immune to America's deep prejudice. In the Rat Pack, Davis achieved unprecedented visibility, but he also embodied the paradox of being celebrated and degraded at the same time. By the early 1960s, Sammy Davis Jr. had become one of the most recognizable entertainers in America. He could do everything: sing ballads that melted hearts, deliver comedy routines with perfect timing, and dance with a speed and precision that left audiences gasping. On stage, he was a one-man universe, a performer who seemed larger than life. His albums sold in the millions, his concerts drew standing ovations night after night, and Hollywood studios cast him in films that finally acknowledged his magnetic presence. Yet with the fame came pressures that carried a devastating cost. Davis felt he had to work twice as hard as his white counterparts to be taken seriously. Friends recalled that he rehearsed until dawn, pushing his body and voice to their limits. He often said that perfection was his only weapon against racism. If he was flawless, no critic could deny his worth. But this relentless pursuit of excellence left him exhausted, dependent on stimulants to keep up the pace. His personal life was equally turbulent. When Davis married Swedish actress May Britt in 1960, the backlash was immediate. Interracial marriage was still illegal in many states, and their union was met with threats, boycotts, and condemnation from both Hollywood executives and conservative groups. Television networks refused to book him, worried about offending audiences in the South. What should have been a celebration of love became another battlefield where Davis paid the price for breaking racial boundaries. Even within success, isolation haunted him. He was surrounded by admirers, yet often confessed to feeling lonely, trapped between two worlds: adored on stage, but scrutinized offstage. His fame made him a pioneer, but also a target. Every triumph carried the sting of sacrifice, as though each standing ovation came at the cost of his peace. Sammy Davis Jr. had reached the pinnacle of show business, but the weight of carrying that crown was crushing. Beneath the glitter of fame, he was paying in health, in love, and in the constant reminder that America's racial divide never let him rest. As the 1960s gave way to the 1970s, Sammy Davis Jr. remained a dazzling force in entertainment. He performed at sold-out concerts across America, starred in films, and appeared on television shows that introduced his talent to millions of households. His hit song, The Candyman, climbed to #1 on the Billboard charts, proving that a black entertainer could dominate the mainstream in ways once thought impossible. Yet, behind the accolades, the reminders of racism never vanished. Davis was sometimes criticized by members of the black community, who felt he had compromised too much to survive in white-dominated Hollywood. They accused him of laughing at racist jokes during Rat Pack shows or of aligning himself too closely with white power brokers. Davis defended himself by insisting that he was breaking barriers from within, using charm and talent to soften the prejudice that otherwise would have locked him out completely. His dilemma revealed the impossible tightrope he had to walk. Too bold, and Hollywood would shut its doors. Too accommodating, and he risked being seen as a sellout. One of the most controversial moments came when Davis publicly embraced President Richard Nixon at the Republican National Convention in 1972. He believed that aligning with political power might help advance civil rights, but the gesture sparked outrage among black activists who viewed Nixon as hostile to their cause. Davis's attempt at bridging divides only deepened his sense of alienation, caught between communities that both demanded loyalty. Still, his influence could not be denied. Younger performers like Michael Jackson and Gregory Hines cited him as an inspiration, the proof that a black artist could be as versatile and as celebrated as any white star. Davis's legacy was etched not only in his artistry but in the wounds he carried. He had broken barriers, but the scars of racism in Hollywood endured long after the curtain closed. Sammy Davis Jr. left behind a complicated inheritance, a model of resilience, but also a warning of the personal cost exacted by an industry that applauded his genius while never fully accepting his humanity. By the late 1970s and early 1980s, Sammy Davis Jr. had spent more than 5 decades in the spotlight. To the world, he was still the dazzling entertainer who could sing, dance, and joke his way into any audience's heart. But behind the glitter, his body was breaking down, his finances were collapsing, and Hollywood was showing just how fickle it could be. Years of grueling performance schedules and constant pressure to prove himself had left Davis physically drained. He battled exhaustion, injuries from relentless dancing, and a throat that had been pushed to its limits by endless shows. By the time he entered his 60s, he was no longer the energetic performer who could tap for hours. His health was deteriorating. He was also burdened by a lifelong addiction to alcohol and drugs that had been fueled by the stress of keeping up with the demands of fame. Financial ruin became the cruelest betrayal. Despite earning millions over his career, Davis found himself drowning in debt. The Internal Revenue Service came after him for unpaid taxes that ballooned to millions of dollars. Much of his wealth had been mismanaged, siphoned away by bad deals and unscrupulous advisors who took advantage of his trust. Davis admitted bitterly that he had worked harder than most entertainers of his era, yet was left nearly penniless in his final years. It was a humiliation for a man who had once been the toast of Las Vegas. The deepest cut of all came with his health. In the late 1980s, doctors diagnosed him with throat cancer. For a man whose voice was his weapon, his identity, his lifeline, the disease was devastating. Worse still, because of his financial problems, Davis struggled to afford the medical care he needed. The industry that had once cheered his every move seemed to look away as he wasted away from the very illness that silenced his song. When Sammy Davis Jr. died in May of 1990, at the age of 64, Hollywood gave him tributes, but many whispered that he deserved far more than he received. Frank Sinatra covered some of his funeral costs, a final gesture of loyalty from a lifelong friend. Yet for Davis, the tragedy was undeniable. After a lifetime of breaking barriers, dazzling crowds, and carrying the weight of racial prejudice on his shoulders, he left the world not as the celebrated king of entertainment, but as a man drained by debt, illness, and betrayal. The deepest betrayal was not just personal, it was systemic. The very industry he helped shape had benefited from his genius while discarding him when he was most vulnerable. Sammy Davis Jr.'s story is one of the most haunting in Hollywood history. He rose from a childhood spent on the road to become one of the most versatile entertainers the world had ever seen. He stood shoulder to shoulder with legends. He broke barriers on stage and screen, and he carried the weight of expectation not only for himself, but for generations of black performers who would follow in his footsteps. And yet, Despite the triumphs, his life ended as a sobering reminder of how America often treats its pioneers. He was showered with applause but denied dignity. He was praised for his artistry but punished for his skin color. He was called a genius while being made to laugh at racist jokes to keep white audiences comfortable. In the end, he gave everything: his health, his money, his voice, even his very identity, in exchange for acceptance that never fully came. The tragedy of Sammy Davis Jr. is not just about one man. It is about the cruelty of a system that exploited brilliance without offering justice, that rewarded talent but withheld equality. His life forces us to ask, how many more icons have been broken under the weight of an industry built on prejudice? Sammy's smile and sparkle lit up the world, but his pain reveals a darker truth about Hollywood's history. To remember him only for his songs and dances is to forget the cost. His real legacy lies in the reminder that fame cannot erase injustice, and that the brightest lights often cast the darkest shadows. Sammy Davis Jr.'s journey was dazzling, heartbreaking, and unforgettable. His story shows us that talent alone is never enough, when prejudice holds the power to silence even the brightest voices. By remembering his struggles and triumphs, we honor not just an entertainer, but a man who carried the burden of racism while still giving the world his brilliance. If you believe stories like Sammy's deserve to be told, do not let them fade into history. Share this video so others can learn the truth behind the glamour. Leave a comment with your thoughts. What part of Sammy's life moved you the most? And if you want to keep exploring the hidden legacies of Hollywood's brightest yet most tragic stars, make sure to subscribe. Together, we will keep these voices alive, and we will never forget the price they paid for our applause.